Hello and welcome to another episode of Prague's Tour Guide. My name is Patrick, and in today's video we'll focus on Terezin concentration camp, the largest concentration camp in Czechoslovakia during World War II. In today's video we'll focus on the small fortress behind me. Terezin was founded in 1780 by Joseph II, and he named it after his mother, Maria Theresa. The full name was Terezinstadt, which means Teresa's town in German. And it consists of two fortresses. Today we'll focus on the small fortress. However, about 1 kilometer away from here, there's also the large fortress. But we'll focus on the small fortress today. The small fortress was established as a prison. It took 10 years to build. It was finished in 1790, and from the start it was a prison for political prisoners of the Austrian Empire. So people who opposed the Habsburg monarchy, they were sent here. It was the worst dungeon in the Austrian Empire. The most famous prisoner from this period is Gavril Princip, who's famous for killing, or infamous I should say, for killing Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914, which led to World War I. So he was only 18 years old and he couldn't be sentenced to death. You had to be at least 20 years old according to the Austrian criminal code. So he received 20 years of dungeon in the small fortress. He died 4 years later in 1918. After World War I, we became independent from Austria. We became Czechoslovakia, and the small fortress continued to be a prison, but it was used for regular prisoners until June 1940. When it became a Gestapo prison. The main Gestapo prison was in Pankráč in Prague, but it was overcrowded. So by June 1940, they chose small fortress to become a Gestapo prison, and it existed from June 1940 until May 1945. After World War II, the small fortress for 3 years became a concentration camp for local Germans. They were sent there with their families as well. And after 1948, all the Germans were gone, and it became a memorial, and it remains a memorial until today. So now we'll have a look at the National Cemetery. And the National Cemetery was established after World War II, after the liberation. The Russians liberated Terezin on the 8th of May 1945, and they discovered mass graves in the area. And they start to move people, they exhumed the bones and they moved the bodies here. And altogether there are 10,000 people buried here. There are 2,386 individual graves. They're marked by the tombstones, and about 7,700 people are buried in the mass graves, which are marked by the big black blocks in the middle. There's a rose field. So there are people from 3 places here. There are people from the small fortress, people from the big fortress, which was a ghetto for Jews during World War II, and then there are people from concentration camp Leitmeritz, Litoměřice, which is a nearby town where the Nazis established a labor camp in 1944. So if you look at the tombstones, you can see some of them have a name on it. If they knew who the person was, there's a name. There's also date of birth, date of death. Sometimes you find the prison, the uniform prison number of the prisoner, but often there's only a number of the tombstone, which means that they didn't know who the person was. It was usually the people who died at the end of the war, near the liberation, that they knew who they were. A lot of people died even after the liberation, because there was an epidemic of typhus that started in spring 1945, and a lot of people died even after the liberation. So we'll have a look at the mass grave in the middle. Yeah, here we have a plaque dedicated to the victims of the largest execution in the history of the small fortress. Overall, approximately 300 people were executed during World War II in the small fortress, but the largest execution happened on the 2nd of May 1945, only 3 days before the Germans left and 6 days before the Russians came and liberated the fortress. They were members mostly of the Prague Youth Communist resistance movement. Some of them were even teenagers, 49 boys, 3 girls, and they were shot at the shooting range in the small fortress. During World War II, in those 5 years between June 1940 and May 45, 32,000 people passed through the small fortress. 90% of them were Czech resistance fighters, and the remaining 10% were prisoners of war. There were gypsies, homosexuals, there were regular criminals, and there were also Jews. Most of the Jews that ended up here were from the ghetto, from the big fortress. They ended up here for misdemeanors in the big fortress. So it's quite different from the big fortress, which was vast majority of people there were Jewish. 155,000 passed through the big fortress, and they were predominantly Jewish. So let's tour the inside of the small fortress now. So now we're standing at the administrative courtyard. This was the first place where the prisoners arrived when they arrived to the prison. The new prisoners, they were lined up facing the wall, and one by one they were called into Geschäftszimmer, which was a registration room. So there they set up a registration card for each prisoner. Then he was sent back, and after some more waiting, they were called to number 6 Kamer, where they took all their belongings. The only belongings that the prisoners could keep during their imprisonment was a handkerchief, a comb, and a wedding ring. And then there they received a uniform, they received blanket, a bowl, and a spoon. At the beginning of the war also a towel. And each prisoner also had a number on his uniform, so from that moment onward he was called only by his number, not by his name. Only in Auschwitz they tattooed the number on prisoners. In other camps they had them on their uniforms. And they were also marked, they had an armband where it was marked why the prisoner is here and what's his background. So it was a triangle of different color. For example, pink triangle meant that the prisoner is homosexual, and if there was another triangle, so together 2 triangles, they were a Star of David, it meant that the prisoner was Jewish, and the Jews received the worst treatment in concentration camps. There were also letters inside of the triangle or the star, which marked the origin, nationality of the prisoner. So for example, TCH meant Czechian, Czech, or D meant Deutsch, German, and so on. Yeah, these buildings, this building over here, they were Gestapo offices. Now here we have Wachstube, which was a guard's room. The most infamous guard of the small fortress worked here. His name was Anton Mallet, and he had a nickname Handsome Tony. He beat more than 100 people to death, 100 prisoners to death, and he never faced justice. You know, after World War II, he fled to Austria, where he was questioned by the Austrian officials, but he downplayed his role in Holocaust and they let him go. Then in Czechoslovakia, in the meantime, he was sentenced to death, but the Austrian refused to extradite him. Mr. Mallet then moved to Merano in northern Italy. It's that former Austrian part of Italy where they speak German, and he lived there until 1988. The Italians refused to extradite him. In 1988, they cancelled his visa, and he moved close to Munich, to Germany, and he worked on a farm in Germany. And there was a group called Silent Help, Stille Hilfe, led by a daughter of Himmler, Heinrich Himmler, and she organized this group, and they were helping former Nazis with their lives. So she found him accommodation and job near Munich in 1988. Then, 1989, communism collapsed in Czechoslovakia. The death sentence was abolished. And in the 90s still, the German government refused to extradite Anton Mallet. Finally, there was a trial against him in 2001. However, by that time, Anton Mallet was 89 years old. So he got a life sentence, but he never saw the inside of a jail cell because he died a year later in 2002. So some Nazis, or some of them, were not punished. Now we'll have a look at the warden's office. So the warden of the prison for the whole 5 years was Heinrich Jekyll, a German who was born near Frankfurt. This was his secretary's desk, and that was Heinrich Jekyll's desk inside. Heinrich Jekyll was responsible for the horrible treatment of the prisoners here. He was a sadist, and he even executed some of the prisoners himself. He had a nickname among the prisoners. The nickname was Peña, which could be translated as a shorty. I guess he was a short guy, and As I said, he was responsible for all the atrocities that happened. You know, the conditions in which the prisoners lived were not much different from the conditions in the worst camps like Auschwitz or Treblinka or Majdanek. Heinrich Jekyll, he lived with his wife and 2 teenage daughters in the Lord's house, Herren house, Lord's house. There was that big house over there. They had apartments. There were apartments of the guards and Heinrich Jekyll as well. They were living there with their families. Heinrich Jekyll's idea was also to put that sign over there, Arbeit macht frei, work makes free. It was one of the prisoners in 1940 who painted it. And Heinrich Jekyll, at the end of the war, he fled with the other Germans. On the 5th of May 1945, they fled to Bavaria. They buried their Nazi uniforms and they put on civilian clothes and tried to hide among other civilians in Germany. However, he was captured by American patrol in Bavaria, recognized, and they sent him back here. He spent 1 year imprisoned in the small fortress, and in 1946 he was hanged in a nearby town, Litoměřice, Leitmeritz. So he didn't escape. So after the registration, the prisoners, men were sent to the men's section and women were sent to the women's section. You know, out of 32,000 prisoners that passed through here during World War II, 5,000 were women. So we'll have a look at the men's section. So now we're standing in the first courtyard where men were imprisoned. Up to 1,500 people were kept here in either mass cells over here or solitary cells over there. Now, here we have Hofverwaltung, which was a court administration building. There were guards who worked there. And here we can see a bell. That bell was rang every morning and there was counting over here. So Heinrich Jekyll personally did the counting. If you were too sick to work, you were sent to number 14 over there, which was a sick room, where you either recovered or you died. You know, Heinrich Jekyll divided into the prisoners into 2 groups, you know, able to work and useless. So after the counting, the prisoners went to their cells. They received breakfast, which was a half a liter of fake coffee and about 400 grams of bread. Near the end of the war, it was only 200 grams of bread. And then they were sent to work. Some of the prisoners worked inside of the fortress. Most were sent outside in work groups. The work groups were put together in the Hofverwaltung. So they would receive tools from Gerätausgabe, tool storage, and either they would walk to work or they would be loaded on trucks on the administrative courtyard and they would be driven to work. For lunch and dinner, there were usually vegetable stew, potato soup. Occasionally there was a meat stew. If you missed your lunch because you were working outside of the fortress, you received it with your dinner in the evening. So now we'll have a look inside one of the mass cells. They're all identical, so if you've seen one, you've seen them all. Only in the fourth courtyard they are different. So this mass cell was for prisoners from the Soviet Union. They were Russian POWs. Between 60 and 90 men were kept here. So they slept next to each other, one by one. Here, these are for their personal belongings. There was a stove that could be used to heat up the room. You know, in the winter it gets quite cold, so they received a bucket of coal. And here there's a toilet and a sink. You know, the Jews and the Russian prisoners of war received the worst treatment out of all the prisoners. Now, these 2 cells were Jewish cells. This was the same one as the one we saw before, but this one was a special cell. This was originally a solitary cell for 1 person only, but the Germans kept up to 70 Jews all in one room. There were so many of them they couldn't even sit down, they were all standing. And another problem was that they closed the door, the window was closed, and this pig hole was the only source of air. And by the end of the night, up to half of all the people suffocated, especially the sick, the old ones. So there's no furniture, as you can see. They only had a bucket as a toilet, and this was it. You know, from the 1,500 Jews that passed through the small fortress, 500 of them died here. Others probably died in other camps because people were sent out to other camps from the small fortress and from the big fortress. This cell is also where they kept Heinrich Jekyll for 1 year after World War II, awaiting his trial. Yeah, now we'll have a look at the doctor's office. There was a German doctor who came here twice a week. His name was Benno Krenert. He worked in a nearby hospital in Litoměřice. And when he came, he was trying to help the prisoners. He set up an office here. The problem was he didn't have medicines and tools. And he asked Heinrich Jekyll whether he can bring tools from the hospital, but Heinrich Jekyll didn't allow it. So then Mr. Krenert, he started to smuggle medicines and tools in. So they were able to perform surgeries here. For example, they did amputation of a leg with very simple tools, no anesthesia. So it's quite difficult. Benno Krenert, he also worked with prisoners who were doctors before their imprisonment, and together they tried to help prisoners. Now, Benno Krenert, he was not allowed to treat Jews, but he did anyway. So after World War II, he was acquitted because of the testimonials, positive testimonials of the prisoners. So now we'll have a look at the solitary cells. Now the solitary cells were used as a punishment, and also this is where interrogation took place and torture. So some of the worst atrocities that happened in the camp, in the fortress, happened here on this little courtyard. For example, on one occasion, 2 prisoners who tried to escape, they were stoned to death by other prisoners over here. And also the Gestapo interrogations took place here. So, for example, they received a call from Prague that they need information from somebody. So this is where they would torture them. Now, everything you've seen so far was part of the fortress. It was built already before World War II. So this was an existing prison, and it was just taken over by the Gestapo. Yeah, we can have a look in some of the solitaries. Some of them don't have a window. The most famous cell is cell number 1, where Gavrilo Princip was kept. Gavrilo Princip, as I mentioned before, was the guy who killed Archduke Ferdinand on the 28th of June 1914, which led to World War I. He shot him and his wife in Sarajevo, and he received 20 years of dungeon in the small fortress. He spent the first 2 years in a solitary cell, and then 2 years in a local hospital because he got bone tuberculosis, and he died in spring 1918. He was mistreated horribly by the guards who blamed him for World War I. He was here with several other members of the group Black Hand, which were Serbian fighters for independence. Hey, over there, that white building, there was a kitchen. Next to it, there was a food storage. Over here, there was laundry. And now we'll have a look at the showers. So the prisoners, they were taking showers once a week, every Saturday. First went women, then men, and then Jews at the end. So the prisoners would come in, take off their clothes, their uniforms, underwear went in the small pot, uniforms were in the big pot, and they ran pressured steam through those pots to, it was disinfection. So now we'll have a look at the showers. These were actual showers, there were no gas chambers in Terezin, although in spring 1945 they started to build gas chambers in the big fortress, but they never finished them. they changed their mind because they thought maybe it's better not to create any more evidence of killing since World War II was lost. So after the shower, they got the uniforms back. They got them steamed, so they were wet. And imagine if it was freezing outside in January, you would have to wear a wet uniform. It sometimes happened that the uniform froze on the prisoners. And over here, here we have a boiler of water. It was powered by coal. So they kept coal over here, they put it inside, boiled the water. Then over there's a steam accumulator. And they ran the steam into these pots to delouse the uniforms. Now over here, this little pot was used for chemicals. They could add chemicals to kill the insects inside the uniforms. Now we'll have a look at the sick room. You can see the sign here, Krankenstube, sick room. And prisoners who were too sick to work, they were sent here and they were attended by the doctors. Later there were so many sick people that they set up a hospital on the other side of the moat over there. And here, number 15, there was a washroom. Let's have a look inside. Now this washroom is relatively nice, and that's because it was used for propaganda. In 1943, the International Red Cross asked in Germany whether the rumors about Holocaust are true. And the Nazis, they invited the Red Cross to come see for themselves. They were supposed to come to Terezin and to Auschwitz. They only came to Terezin, to the big fortress. If they ever came to the small fortress, they wanted to show them this washroom to see that the prisoners have comfort and that they're not mistreated. But in reality, the Red Cross never bothered coming to the small fortress. Neither they came to Auschwitz, and this washroom wasn't used. It was occasionally used by the capos. Now, the Red Cross, they spent 6 hours in the big fortress, and after touring the big fortress with the Nazis, and they weren't able to talk to any of the prisoners. They just saw them from the distance, but the Nazis would choose only like healthy-looking, new arrived prisoners who didn't lose much weight yet. And it was all set up. They would set up stores in the streets. They would introduce fake money, saying that the Jews are able to buy goods in the stores. They would clean the ghetto, of course. They allowed sports to take place, like a football match, or they allowed concerts to take place. So after 6 hours of touring the big fortress, the Red Cross, who were, by the way, 2 Danish guys, 1 Swiss guy, they wrote a report in which they said that the life in the big fortress is no different from life in an average German city. I don't know if they really believed it, but that's what they wrote in the report. So now we left the first courtyard and we're standing above a moat. Terezin was built as a fortress, and it was built on the joint of 2 rivers, Elbe and Eger, and they built special canal to be able to flood the moat around the fortress. So in this room there were devices who would open and let the moat be flooded. Now inside the moat here, there were fights between prisoners. The guards, they organized fights between Jewish prisoners. They gave them sticks and it was fight to death. And they would watch them from this bridge down there. And also nearby is where the most famous escape took place. In the history of the small fortress, during World War II, only 8 prisoners escaped successfully. And 3 of them escaped through here on the 6th of December 1944, which was a St. Nicholas Day. The prisoners knew that the guards will be celebrating this holiday in the evening, so in the afternoon they stole a ladder from the tool storage, they hid below this bridge, and after sunset used the ladder to climb over this wall and ran away. They got on a train. All 3 men were from Pilsen, so they got on a train to Pilsen and they hid among their friends in Pilsen. Those 3 men were Czech resistance fighters. Now, the Germans found out the next morning during counting that 3 men are missing, but they never captured them. Yeah, this building over here was a hospital. Now there's an exhibition about Milada Horáková, the most famous woman that was imprisoned here during World War II. Now these 2 rooms were morgues for dead bodies, and here there's an entrance to a tunnel. Now there are altogether 24 kilometers of tunnels in the small fortress alone, so you can spend several hours just walking through the tunnels. The tunnels were built to protect the fortress. They were built for the soldiers so they could fight the enemy from inside of the tunnel. During World War II they were sealed and nobody could go in because the Nazis were afraid that the prisoners might use them to escape or to fight back. So here they opened 500 meters of the tunnel so that you can go through, and it will lead us to the shooting range. You know, back in the 18th century, people were shorter, so I have to bend here. I get all the spiders in my hair. So here you can see loopholes that could be used to defend the fortress. Now, Terezin is a great example of fortress engineering from the end of 18th century, because it was intact. It was never used in a war, in a battle. The idea was to build a fortress to protect us from Prussia, because we waged wars against Prussia. Prussia is northern Germany today, and throughout the 18th century. So Joseph II decided to build a fortress on the joint of these 2 rivers, Elbe and Eger, because the Prussians were always entering our country following the Elbe River. However, because the warfare changed and the battles took place outside in the fields in the 19th century, this fortress was never used. You know, here you can see how the tunnel is blocked off by this wall with loopholes. So that's a defensive feature. They thought about what if the enemy gets inside of the tunnel, so they could shoot at him through these loopholes. I should also mention that 200 million bricks were used to build both fortresses, the big one and the small one, and they were made by a brick factory in Romania. So somebody got a contract, quite an exclusive contract. So we finally made it to the end of the tunnel. You know, this tunnel is the same length as the Charles Bridge, but it feels a lot longer. Anyway, this is how we get to the shooting range. For people who are claustrophobic, they can walk around. They don't have to go through the tunnel, but I think it's more interesting. Now, the shooting range is where guards and soldiers were practicing shooting, and it's also where executions were taking place. So approximately 300 people were killed here. So you can see, if you look on the wall, you can see how it's damaged from the bullets. And there you can see a little bush, and that's where they put the prisoners, and they were shot from close distance. The Nazis also built gallows over there, and 3 prisoners were hanged. I don't know why. Maybe it was arbitrary. They just wanted to hang someone instead of shooting them. I'm not sure. Because the tunnels were sealed, the prisoners were brought to executions through this door. And then there's another tunnel over there, a gate, which among the prisoners was called the Gate of Death, because very few prisoners came back once they passed through the gate. So at that shooting range is also where they executed those 52 young members whose plaque we saw at the beginning of the tour. Here there's a statue called Nameless by a Czech sculptor, Ladislav Chochola. It shows the nameless victims of Holocaust. So now we made it to the other side of the Lord's house where the guards lived with their families. And the guards, they enjoyed all the comfort. For example, in 1942, they built a water reservoir which they used as a swimming pool. 60 Jews died building this swimming pool. And it was used by the guards and their families. Now there was a huge contrast where on one side you have kids swimming in a swimming pool, and on the other side of the wall there was a shooting range where they executed people. They also built a cinema inside this building where the guards and the SS soldiers would watch contemporary movies, and allegedly behind the cinema they played football. So this is the original cinema built by the Nazis, so they would watch movies here. Now you can come here to watch a document about Terezin. Now behind me, that building, those were barracks for SS soldiers. There were 120 SS soldiers that were present here, and they could intervene in case of a riot. Now over here, there were prison cells for special prisoners. Those prisoners were treated better than other prisoners. They were, for example, Gestapo or SS members who committed a crime, so then they were sent here, or German nationals, they were sent here, and they lived in better environment, you know, with furniture, and they could even stay together with wives, for example, if they were both imprisoned. So special prison cells. Behind this, there were stables where they had horses. They also kept some farm animals like cows. So now we'll have a look at the fort courtyard. The fort courtyard was started to be built in 1943. It was finished in autumn 1944. Yeah, over here there are mass cells and 125 solitary cells. In spring 1945, the Nazis were evacuating camps to the east and to the north of Czechoslovakia, and they were sending these evacuated prisoners here on the death marches. And most of these evacuated people that came, they were imprisoned here in the fort courtyard. So this is an inside of a mass cell. Up to 600 people were kept in one such mass cell, and only 9 sinks and 2 toilets. It was in one of these mass cells that epidemic of typhus started. It was brought in by the evacuated prisoners, and the Nazis did absolutely nothing to stop it. So, as I said, a lot of people died from typhus even after the liberation. Now the solitary cells which are on the other side, they weren't solitary at the end of the war. There were up to 14 people in each of these cells. Up there there's a guard tower, so 2 guards with machine guns and rifles. They could watch the courtyard. So this is a section of the fortress that was built and added to the fortress. So here we came to the entrance to the administrative courtyard. So as you can see, we did a big loop through the small fortress. Now over here behind the gate, there were workshops where the prisoners were, for example, making furniture for the guards and for the SS. And next to it, the building, there was a canteen where the guards were eating and drinking. It was a dangerous job to work in the kitchen of the canteen because the drunk guards like to terrorize the prisoners. Yeah, around the corner there's also the women's section of the camp. There were wives of the guards who were working as the guards in the women's section. So we're inside the canteen. By the way, this furniture here is all original, as well as the lights made by the prisoners. And also what I find interesting is that you can see pictures of the Gestapo guards. So for example, Heinrich Jekyll, or here we have infamous Anton Mallet, who had a nickname Handsome Tony. So So guys, this is the end of our tour of the small fortress of Terezin. Thank you for watching. As always, if you'd like to book a tour in person, either with me or one of my colleagues, you can go to our website, lucidtours.com. During our Terezin tour, we also cover the big fortress, so there's a lot more to see. We might also cover it in another episode. So thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe to our channel. You can hit the like button if you want, and I'll see you on our next tour. So take care.